A young woman vanished from her own home, while her parents slept just a room away. Detectives couldn't find a single clue, and it seemed like solving this mystery was simply impossible. But eventually, the case took a shocking turn that uncovered the unexpected truth and left the whole country stunned. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in Markham, Ontario. When she was just a baby, she was adopted by a couple who surrounded her with love and care. Later, her parents divorced and Alicia stayed with her mom, but she still saw her dad regularly. She loved being outdoors, and her biggest passion was canoeing. She would often head out to Lake Ontario, where she could spend hours paddling across the open water. Eventually, she even started teaching kids how to canoe at local camps. After finishing school, Alicia got a job in sales at HP's Canadian branch, where she quickly proved herself as hardworking and reliable. At the time, she was still living with her mom, who had since remarried. Together with Alicia's stepdad, they converted the basement into a full apartment with its own entrance, so Alicia could stay close to her family while still having her own independence. On August 16, 2005, 25-year-old Alicia went out for an evening walk with her mom and their dogs. Alicia was in great spirits. She had just found out she was getting a promotion the next day. She shared the news with her mom, who wasn't the least bit surprised. Knowing how seriously Alicia took her career, when they got back home, Alicia's boyfriend Sean stopped by to congratulate her. They spent a few hours together, and around midnight he headed home. The next day around noon, Sean called the police to report Alicia missing. He explained that when he got home the night before, he tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He figured she'd already gone to bed and didn't think much of it. But when she didn't pick up the phone the following morning either, he started to worry. Sean drove over to her place and saw that her car was still parked outside. That immediately struck him as odd. Alicia should have been at work hours ago, especially since it was the day she was supposed to get promoted. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. So he walked around to the back of the house and noticed the gate standing wide open. Lying on the grass were Alicia's shoes, an empty cup, and a pack of cigarettes. That was enough to send him into full panic mode, so he decided to call the police right away. After that, Sean called Alicia's mom, and she and her husband rushed back home. By the time they arrived, several police cars were already outside. Officers went through the house, but found no sign of Alicia. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, but detectives noticed something deeply unsettling. It looked like Alicia had never gone to bed the night before. Her bed was neatly made. Freshly washed clothes she had planned to put away were still sitting out. And in the bathroom was her ring, the one she always took off before going to sleep. On top of that, all of her belongings, including her keys and purse, were still on the table. Police quickly confirmed she hadn't shown up for work and officially opened a missing person investigation. Detectives quickly concluded that Alicia hadn't just walked away from home. This looked much more like an abduction. Even though there were no real clues inside the house, her shoes lying by the open gate pointed towards something sinister. And since it looked like Alicia never went to bed that night, investigators believed she may have been taken right after her boyfriend left. Sean got home and called her just 15 minutes later, but by then, she wasn't answering. It seemed as if someone had grabbed her the moment she stepped outside to see him off, right there by that open gate. Alicia's mom hadn't heard anything unusual, and canvassing the neighbors turned up no leads either. With no other direction, police turned their attention to Sean, the most obvious suspect. He was the last person to see her, but detectives struggled to find any motive. The two had only been dating for about a month and a half, and everyone close to Alicia said the relationship was going smoothly. Police searched Sean's car and home, but found nothing suspicious. They also spoke with his neighbors, asking if they had noticed anything odd, like him taking out the trash in the middle of the night. But that led nowhere too. Eventually, detectives started to doubt his involvement. They dug into Alicia's circle of friends and acquaintances, but no one stood out as suspicious. So, detectives launched a massive search operation, setting up a command post inside a local school while the kids were away on summer break. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, and asked the public for help. On the very first day, around 60 people joined in. But by the next day, the number had grown to nearly 400. The response was so overwhelming that police actually had to send some volunteers home because they didn't have enough resources to manage such a huge group. Even so, the search for Alicia quickly became the largest in Ontario's history, and the story spread far beyond Canada's borders. There were a few reasons why the case grabbed so much attention. First, no one could understand how Alicia could vanish from her own backyard in a matter of minutes, with no sounds, no witnesses, and no real clues. And second, from the very beginning, a lot of people pointed the finger at her boyfriend, convinced he had somehow pulled off the perfect crime. One detail that especially fueled suspicion was the fact that Sean called the police almost immediately after Alicia didn't pick up her phone. He had her mother's number, but instead of calling her first to check if she knew where Alicia was, he went straight to the police. About a week and a half after Alicia vanished, the media reported that Sean had refused to take a polygraph test and had stopped cooperating with the police. News that only fueled suspicions against him. Reporters also spoke with him directly, and he admitted that he believed he was now the prime suspect in the case. Meanwhile, the search was going nowhere. Police set up a hotline and got hundreds of calls, but not a single one brought them any closer to finding Alicia. Eventually, detectives had no choice but to call off the search operation and shut down the command post, since the school they were using had to reopen as summer break was ending. A month went by, and investigators still couldn't find a single new lead. They looked into ex-convicts living in the area, interviewed hundreds of Alicia's neighbors, spoke with her co-workers, but every path hit a dead end. At that point, detectives were leaning toward the idea that whoever kidnapped her must have known her personally. That would explain why no one ever heard her scream. That's how things stayed until September 20th, when the case suddenly took a shocking turn. A man walked into the police station with his lawyer and announced that he was the one who had killed Alicia Ross. The man was 31-year-old Daniel Sylvester, Alicia's neighbor, living just a few feet from her house. He said that around 1:30 a.m., he went outside for a walk and stepped into the narrow alleyway between their homes. That's where he ran into Alicia. Seeing him there in the middle of the night startled her, and she asked what he was doing. Daniel told her he had every right to stand outside his own house. An argument broke out, and according to Daniel, when Alicia insulted him, he completely lost control. He punched her, knocking her to the ground, and then kept hitting her as she tried to fight back. Enraged, he slammed her head against the stone walkway several times until she stopped moving. That's when he realized she wasn't breathing and that he had killed her. As he confessed, Daniel even laid down on the floor in front of detectives, physically acting out how he had beaten her to death. Panicking, he froze for a few minutes, not knowing what to do next. Then he made a decision. He had to get rid of the body. He dragged Alicia into his garage, washed the blood off the walkway with a garden hose, and lined the trunk of his mother's car with cardboard. His mom, by the way, was asleep inside the house at the time. He then stripped both himself and Alicia, stuffed the clothes into trash bags, and wrapped her head in rags and duct tape to stop the blood before loading her into the trunk. After that, Daniel went back home, took a shower, and changed into clean clothes. Around 5 a.m., he got into his mother's car and drove about an hour out to a small town called Manila. He found some remote swampy area and dumped Alicia's body, along with the trash bags containing their blood-stained clothes. When he returned home, he suddenly realized that along with his clothes, he had also accidentally thrown out his own wallet with all of his bank cards and driver's license. Over the next few days, Daniel kept going back to the site, desperately trying to find the bag, but he had hidden it so well that he couldn't locate the exact spot again. Still, he remembered exactly where he had left Alicia's body, since he'd stashed it separately. A few weeks later, panic started creeping in. He was terrified the police would eventually find it, so he went back to move the remains. By that point, the body was badly decomposed, and he had to gather the remains by piece. He wrapped them in a tarp, put them in the trunk, and drove about 40 minutes away to a tiny town called Coboconk. There, he found a secluded spot in the woods and hid the body again. Afterward, Daniel confessed that he pleasured himself to ease the tension, but swore he never touched Alicia in a sexual way and that this was never his motive. After finishing his confession, Daniel said he never meant to kill Alicia, but his rage took over and he just couldn't stop himself. One of the detectives told him he should write a letter to Alicia's parents and apologize for what he'd done. Daniel broke down in tears, admitted he had no right to take their daughter away, and scribbled a short apology on a piece of paper. He also said he deeply regretted the pain he had caused his own mother, knowing she would now have to live the rest of her life carrying the shame of his actions. After Daniel's confession, detectives asked him to show them to the spot where he had hidden the body, and sure enough, they found Alicia's remains there. Because of how badly decomposed the body was, experts couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but they did confirm that at least 30 of her bones had been broken. They also discovered that not all of the remains were in that location, suggesting Daniel had left part of them at the first site. Right after that, he was placed under arrest, and the news sent shockwaves through the community. Throughout the entire investigation, Daniel had never once been considered a suspect, even though he lived literally right next door. Soon, more details about him began surfacing in the media. Daniel had no criminal record, but he had struggled with anxiety and depression since childhood. He had a hard time interacting with other people, which made him an easy target for constant bullying. He also struggled with women, so grew up withdrawn and isolated. As an adult, Daniel spent nearly all of his time at home. None of his neighbors really knew him, and even Alicia's mother admitted she had only seen him just a few times over the years, and only in passing. In the end, Daniel was charged with second-degree murder, though his defense pushed for manslaughter, so the case went to trial. The proceedings began in May 2007, almost 2 years after Alicia's death. Prosecutors argued that Daniel had fully intended to kill her and that the original charge should stand. In their view, he could have been watching Alicia for a long time. After all, she lived just a few feet away. They suggested he might have spied on her through her window and that over time, this turned into an unhealthy obsession. That night, when Alicia was standing outside alone, Daniel likely saw an opportunity to approach her. But instead, he frightened her by sneaking up in the dark alleyway. The prosecution emphasized that Daniel had countless chances to stop while he was attacking her. Yet he chose not to. Then, instead of calling police, he decided to hide the body, spending the entire night cleaning up and getting rid of evidence. Weeks later, he even went back to move the remains so investigators would have a harder time finding them. Because of all this, the prosecution believed Daniel wasn't motivated by guilt when he confessed, but by fear of being caught. After all, he had tossed out his wallet and ID in the same bag as Alicia's bloody clothing. Sooner or later, someone would have found it and tied him directly to the crime. For that reason, prosecutors insisted he deserved to be convicted of second-degree murder. His lawyer tried to convince the jury that Daniel never meant to kill Alicia, that it all happened in the heat of the moment. According to the defense, Daniel lost control after she insulted him and wasn't thinking clearly about what he was doing. They also pointed to his lifelong struggles, constant bullying that left him with low self-esteem, as well as anxiety and depression that had followed him into adulthood. But then, something came out during the trial that didn't do him any favors. A psychiatrist who had evaluated Daniel before court testified that Daniel had admitted to violent fantasies about women. For example, he imagined jumping out of the bushes and attacking them. And he also confessed that he sometimes exposed himself to strangers on the street. That revelation pushed the jury even further toward believing that Daniel likely had planned to kill Alicia. In the end, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. After the verdict, Daniel tried to appeal his sentence, but nothing came of it. His first chance to apply for parole came in 2021, but there's no record of him being released. Since there's no public information suggesting otherwise, it's most likely that he's still behind bars. It's also worth noting that shortly after Daniel's arrest, a local newspaper issued a public apology to Alicia's boyfriend, Sean. For an entire month, many media outlets had painted him as the prime suspect, and according to Sean's father, that time was devastating for him. Not only had he lost his girlfriend, but countless people believed he was a killer who had gotten away with it. After Daniel was sentenced, Alicia's parents created a memorial fund in her name. It helped sponsor canoe lessons for kids at the national park she loved so much. A young mother finished her evening shift and was on her way home when she suddenly disappeared under strange circumstances. As the police launched their investigation, they quickly uncovered unsettling evidence that led to a shocking truth. This case caught national attention as no one could believe something like this actually happened in real life. Summer Cook was born on December 31st, 1985, in the small town of Logan, Ohio. She grew up in a large family with deeply religious parents. From a young age, Summer and her siblings spent a lot of time at the local church, and their family was well known in the community. She was an outgoing, honest person who had no trouble making friends. Summer got along with everyone and was known for her friendly nature. In school, she stayed busy with ballet, played in the jazz band, and participated in theatrical performances. During her high school years, Summer met a boy named William through their church. They lived on the same street, but before that, they didn't know each other very well. The two started dating, and before long, they decided to get married. Over the next few years, Summer and William had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. The family settled close to William's parents, who helped out with the kids almost every day. William's father was a pastor and also ran a small construction business. At one point, the entire family decided to move to Florida after he landed a construction contract there. However, things didn't go as planned, and a few years later, they moved back to Logan. In 2010, Summer decided to divorce William. She got custody of the kids and moved back in with her parents. Since her parents lived on the same street, William and his family were still able to see the children regularly. By the spring of 2011, 25-year-old Summer was dedicating nearly all her time to raising her 3 children, who were 5, 3, and 2 years old at the time. Because of this, she couldn't take on a full-time job, so she worked part-time as a cleaner at a local bank, just a few minutes' drive from her home. Despite her busy schedule, Summer had plans for the future. She wanted to enroll in college to get an education and eventually find a better-paying job. Around this time, she also started dating a man named Adam, who worked as a handyman. On the evening of March 22nd, Summer went to her usual night shift at the bank, which was scheduled to end around 11:20 p.m. Before heading home, she sent a few messages to her boyfriend, Adam, but suddenly stopped responding in the middle of their conversation. At first, Adam thought she might just be busy or running late at work. A bit later, he tried calling her, but Summer didn't answer. Growing concerned, Adam decided to walk over to the bank to check if everything was okay. When he arrived, the first thing Adam noticed was that his car, the one Summer had been using to get to work, was still parked outside. Since her shift had ended almost half an hour ago, he started to feel even more concerned. It was unusual because Summer had always left work at the same time without any delays. He went around to the back door of the bank, which she always used during her shifts, and noticed something behind the dumpster. Lying on the ground were her iPod, car keys, and the battery from her phone. This seemed incredibly suspicious, so Adam immediately called her parents. They confirmed that Summer still hadn't returned home and rushed to the bank. After verifying that the items on the ground did belong to her, they immediately called the police. But to their surprise, her parents quickly learned that they weren't the first ones who contacted the authorities. Just half an hour before they called the police, there had been another report. 2 women who were out for an evening jog had run past the bank and witnessed something horrifying. They saw 2 people in black ski masks grab a woman and force her into a car. The woman struggled and tried to fight back, but she couldn't escape. At the same time, another witness was nearby and he attempted to save her. However, as he approached, a woman stepped out of the car and pepper sprayed him. She then got back into the driver's seat and sped off with the kidnappers and their victim. The 2 joggers immediately ran to the police station, which was only a few blocks away, and reported what they had seen. But instead of springing into action, the officers responded with surprising skepticism. They genuinely thought the women had made the whole thing up, despite their pleas to go and find the abducted person. When the witnesses pressed them to go to the bank and investigate, the officers brushed it off, saying most of their staff were busy conducting traffic stops. Eventually, the women walked to one of their houses, got a car, and drove back to the bank about 20 minutes later. To their surprise, There still wasn't a single police officer at the scene, so they just decided to stay and wait. The officers didn't arrive until nearly an hour later, and even then, they showed little urgency, as if nothing serious had happened. When the husband of one of the women started losing his patience and demanded that they do their job, the police responded with hostility and acted aggressively. Eventually, the officers took action. They determined that the woman who had likely been abducted was Summer. Witnesses also provided a description of the vehicle, a white sedan, that the kidnappers had used to flee the scene. The police issued an alert for the car and then went to talk to Summer's relatives to see if they had any idea who might have wanted to hurt their daughter. Summer's parents told investigators that her relationship with her ex-husband William had been rocky for years, even after the divorce. Summer had told them that William's behavior took a drastic turn right after they got married. He saw himself as deeply religious and demanded complete obedience from her. He controlled who she could talk to and spend time with, expected dinner on the table when he got home, and insisted the house be spotless. He even wouldn't let her go to bed without his permission. On top of this, William actually wanted to take a second wife. Although polygamy was illegal, he believed it was acceptable from a religious standpoint and openly shared his plans with Summer. He browsed websites specifically for women interested in such relationships and was actively searching for someone. At the same time, he told Summer she needed to give him 9 more children on top of the 3 they already had. Besides that, William became increasingly aggressive. He wouldn't let Summer leave the house without him, took away her keys and phone, and tried to control her every move. Eventually, she had enough and decided to file for divorce. But William, as well as his parents, were furious about her decision. He tried to gain full custody of their kids and threatened Summer, saying he'd harm her if she took them away from him. Things got even worse when William found out that Summer was seeing someone new. He already knew Adam, and one day he came across a photo on Adam's social media of him with Summer and the kids. That set him off. William started threatening her again and kept fighting for custody in court, but his threats backfired. After hearing about all of this, the judge sided with Summer and gave her full custody of the kids. William's parents weren't ready to let it go either. They tried to discredit Adam by flooding the police with false claims that he was mistreating the kids. Investigators couldn't find any evidence to support these accusations, but William's parents kept pushing, desperate to regain custody of their grandchildren. Digging deeper, the police uncovered something else. About a year earlier, William's father had started his own church and launched a non-profit organization aimed at helping the homeless and those who had lost their homes. His plans sounded noble. He wanted to build affordable housing for these people. To fund the construction, he began selling lottery tickets and managed to raise several $100,000. But there was a catch. No houses were ever built, and none of the people who bought tickets got their money back. To make things even worse, William's father never gave any explanation about what happened to all the money he'd taken. Around the same time, he lost his license as a priest. While the exact reasons weren't made public, it only added to the questions surrounding him. And just months before Summer disappeared, the family faced yet another blow. They lost their home and were evicted. While the family was still living in their old house, Summer went there to collect the rest of her belongings. She brought Adam along to help load everything into her car and also asked the police to send an officer. She was worried about how her ex-husband's family might react, and her concerns turned out to be justified. William's father immediately became aggressive, demanding that Adam stay off his property. Even with a police officer present, he threatened to shoot and beat Adam. When the officer stepped in to calm things down, William's father lost it and even tried to tackle the officer. That didn't end well. He was arrested and later given a suspended sentence. Investigators also uncovered some unsettling details about William's parents. After William was born, his mother couldn't have more children, which was a devastating blow for her. She became so attached to her grandchildren that she treated them like her own kids. In fact, she even told people that if anything ever happened to William and Summer, she'd take full custody of the children. Summer's parents gave investigators her personal journal, and its contents were heartbreaking. She wrote about how William controlled every part of her life and how his behavior had become more and more aggressive. Aggressive, Summer described feeling like a prisoner in her own home, unable to do anything without his approval. The constant pressure weighed heavily on her, and she often felt like she was living in a nightmare, not reality. After gathering all of this information, the police decided to visit William and his parents, who all lived in the same house. They also discovered that the family owned a car matching the model and color described by witnesses of Summer's abduction. Investigators arrived at their home the day after Summer's disappearance. William claimed that he and his parents had been in town that night. According to him, they had driven to Cleveland, about 3 hours away, to look at some houses. He added that their car broke down during the trip, forcing them to spend the entire night there, and his parents backed up his story. William claimed he hadn't seen his ex-wife in days, not since he dropped off the kids. But the police weren't just going to take his word for it. They got a search warrant for his house and car, hoping to find something that would disprove his alibi. During the search, investigators found a GPS navigator for a car inside the family's home. After extracting the data, they noticed something odd. The device had been turned off at 5:30 p.m. on the day of Summer's abduction and wasn't turned back on until 7:30 a.m. the next morning. What was odd, though, was that the last location recorded before it was turned off wasn't Cleveland, where the family said they'd been looking at houses, but Logan. As for the next morning, the GPS showed that the family arrived at a car wash at 7:30 a.m. The police got their hands on the CCTV footage, which showed all three of them carefully cleaning the car, inside and out, and even changing the tires. By the time investigators had pieced everything together, 8 days had already gone by. They kept searching for Summer around the city and the nearby areas, interviewing people and following up on leads, but nothing seemed to bring them any closer to finding her. Once investigators confirmed that William and his parents had lied about their alibi, they brought all three in for questioning. William and his father denied any involvement in Summer's disappearance, so the detectives shifted their focus to his mother. To their surprise, she confessed almost immediately, claiming that Summer was already dead, and began providing details about what had happened. According to her, the family was furious about the court's decision to grant Summer full custody of the children. They had been trying to convince her to let them spend more time with the kids, but after William's threats and his increasingly aggressive behavior, Summer was too scared to leave her children with them for long. So the family came up with a plan. They decided to scare Summer into reconsidering the custody arrangement. Their idea was to abduct and intimidate her, then force her to agree to their terms before letting her go. But things went horribly wrong. After William and his father forced her into the car using a stun gun, William tied her hands with plastic zip ties. Then he took another one and placed it around her neck. When they realized she was struggling to breathe, they tried to remove it, but none of them had a knife to cut it off. As a result, Summer died, and the family knew they had to get rid of her body. They drove to a nearby town where William's parents regularly attended church. Near the church was a large underground septic tank. Thinking it would be the perfect hiding spot, they dumped her body inside and drove away. Although the woman insisted they never planned to kill Summer, her story seemed highly questionable. Given William's repeated death threats and his father's aggressive behavior toward anyone who restricted his access to the grandchildren, investigators suspected that murder might have been their plan from the start. Police went to the church and discovered Summer's body inside the septic tank. Soon after, medical examiners confirmed that the cause of death aligned with the mother's account, and all three family members were arrested and charged with murder. For Summer's family, the entire ordeal was a devastating blow. Not only had her three children lost their mother, but the police's actions, or lack thereof, raised serious questions and outrage. As we know, the police were alerted to the abduction just minutes after it happened, yet they failed to act for over an hour. Medical experts later confirmed that Summer died about 45 minutes after being kidnapped, meaning there was, potentially, enough time to save her. The police could have immediately began looking for the vehicle based on pretty detailed witness descriptions. Considering the abduction happened in the evening in a small town with almost no traffic, investigators might have had a chance to intercept William and his parents. Instead, they justified their delay by saying that most of their officers were tied up with something else. What angered the public even more was that the police station was just a few hundred yards from the bank where the abduction took place. It would have taken just minutes to get there, even on foot. Yet, despite the witnesses, no one came to Summer's aid. Another troubling part of the case was the plea deal offered to William's mother. In exchange for confessing and revealing the location of Summer's body, she got a much lighter sentence. She also testified in court, sticking to her story, and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison. This means she could be out in just a few years. As for William and his father, both were sentenced to life in prison. Since Summer's death, her children have been living with her parents. For the first 6 months after the murder, they struggled with how to break the devastating news to the kids that they would never see their mom or dad again. The children kept asking when they would see their mom, as well as their paternal grandparents. Eventually, Summer's parents realized they couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. With the help of a child psychologist, they gradually explained what had happened. At the time, they feared their oldest son might hear the truth from his classmates, as the story had become well known throughout Logan. In fact, strangers would occasionally approach the children on the street to express their condolences. This even led Summer's parents to consider changing the children's last names to shield them from being forever linked to the tragedy. As of today, Summer's children have grown up and the family stays out of the public eye. As for William's mother, she's set to be released in 2028. It's unclear whether she'll be legally banned from contacting her grandchildren, but given everything we know about this case, it's possible she may try to reconnect with them. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button. John Anderson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. John's body was discovered by his wife, Lisa Anderson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. John lay motionless in the living room, with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden and unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective James Carter, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Brooksville, everyone had their secrets and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of John's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into John's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. John Anderson was a man of many facets. At 45, he had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Anderson's Supplies, which had been a staple in Brooksville for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, John was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Brooksville society. Despite his public persona, those who knew John well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Lisa had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young, but over time the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional arguments. Friends described John as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. John's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. That evening, John had planned to spend a quiet night with Lisa, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Lisa reported that John had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, and toxicology results were pending. Detectives Miller and Carter knew that they had to dig deeper into John's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Lisa and those closest to John, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Lisa Anderson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Miller and Carter knew better than to take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with John and her potential role in his death. Lisa worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their two children, Jake and Emily, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Lisa was well-liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to John had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of John's death, Lisa recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how John had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Lisa's reaction to John's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved John and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Lisa's statements. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with John, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Miller and Carter decided to explore further, focusing on Lisa's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigation soon led them to Mark Benson, Lisa's co-worker. Initial inquiries revealed that Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detectives suspected that there was more to the story than Lisa had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over John's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Miller and Carter arrived at the Anderson residence the morning after John's body was discovered. The house, a modest two-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Miller, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room where John's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. John lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that John had died of unknown causes. Pending a full autopsy, Carter Miller's partner was outside speaking with the first responders, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude. He had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. Some of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Miller turned her attention to Lisa, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Lisa's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. John had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Miller noted the way Lisa's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Miller and Carter spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Andersons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. A few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Evans, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing John the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, the detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Lisa and expanding to friends, family, and coworkers. The preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction, but Miller and Carter were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that John had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether John's death was natural, or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Miller and Carter continued to scrutinize Lisa's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Lisa's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine, but the detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to John's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Lisa and her coworker, Mark Benson. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Lisa's affair with Mark, exploring how it might connect to John's untimely demise. The discovery of Lisa's affair with Mark Benson was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Mark, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Lisa at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Miller and Carter decided to bring Lisa in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Lisa initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with John's death. Lisa explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. John had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Mark, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to John. Miller and Carter knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Lisa or Mark to John's death. They decided to bring Mark in for questioning. Mark was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Lisa. He claimed that he had no knowledge of John's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that they would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Lisa and Mark had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Brooksville and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in John's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Lisa's motives seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Mark without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Miller and Carter needed to establish a link between the affair and John's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Lisa or Mark. The detectives also started to scrutinize Mark's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Mark might have had his own motives for wanting John out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Lisa could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Miller and Carter were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Lisa or Mark to have orchestrated John's death. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. But the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Mark Benson presented himself as a confident and composed individual, But under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Mark was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Lisa a year prior. At 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Brooksville. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Mark maintained that his relationship with Lisa was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm John. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of John's death, providing an alibi that the detectives would need to verify. As Miller and Carter dug into Mark's background, they found several red flags. Mark had moved to Brooksville after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Mark was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Mark's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Lisa. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Mark wrote about his desperation to start anew, and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate John. The detectives also uncovered that Mark had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Lisa as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Mark might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Lisa's newfound widowhood. To verify Mark's alibi, Miller and Carter visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Mark had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of John's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Mark, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Lisa. Miller and Carter pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Mark's composure started to fray and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if John were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Lisa and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to John's death. Was Mark trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Lisa and Mark under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunities. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for John's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. As the investigation progressed, Miller and Carter encountered numerous twists and turns that complicated the case. New evidence surfaced, leading them down unexpected paths and challenging their initial assumptions. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. One such twist came when the toxicology report was finalized. The foreign substance found in John's system was identified as a rare, fast-acting poison. This poison was not something one could easily acquire, pointing to a premeditated act rather than an accidental overdose. The detectives now had concrete evidence that John's death was a murder, and they needed to find out who had access to such a substance. Their inquiries led them to a local pharmacy where the poison had been purchased. The pharmacist remembered selling the substance to a man matching Mark's description, but there was no solid proof linking Mark directly to the purchase. This added another layer of suspicion, but was not enough to make an arrest. While following up on the lead at the pharmacy, the detectives received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a secluded park shortly before John's death. This information suggested that Lisa might have been plotting something clandestine, possibly involving Mark. The detectives traced the call but found that it originated from a disposable phone, making it impossible to identify the source. Simultaneously, a surprising piece of evidence emerged from John's business dealings. Financial records indicated that John had recently transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown account. Further investigation revealed that this account belonged to a private investigator named Alex Thompson. When questioned, Thompson disclosed that John had hired him to follow Lisa, suspecting her of infidelity. This revelation painted a picture of a man who was not only aware of his wife's affair, but also taking steps to gather evidence. The private investigator's report included photos and detailed logs of Lisa's meetings with Mark. These documents confirmed the affair, but also contained troubling information about Lisa's behavior. According to Thompson, Lisa had been acting erratically in recent weeks, frequently discussing her unhappiness and expressing anger towards John. In one recorded conversation, she mentioned feeling trapped and hinted at wanting to escape her marriage by any means necessary. This new evidence prompted Miller and Carter to reevaluate their approach. They decided to conduct a thorough search of the Anderson home, hoping to find something that might link Lisa or Mark directly to the murder. During the search, they discovered a hidden compartment in Lisa's closet, containing vials of the same rare poison found in John's system. This discovery was damning and suggested Lisa's direct involvement in the crime. Confronted with this evidence, Lisa's demeanor shifted. She became defensive and hostile, accusing the detectives of trying to frame her. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the poison and that someone must have planted it to incriminate her. However, just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Mark Benson came forward with new information, claiming that Lisa had manipulated him into helping her acquire the poison. He provided emails and messages in which Lisa discussed her plan to poison John, making it appear as though Mark was a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind. With conflicting stories from Lisa and Mark, Miller and Carter faced a complex challenge. They needed to determine who was telling the truth and who was orchestrating a cover-up. The investigation had revealed a tangled web of deceit, motives, and opportunities, but the exact sequence of events leading to John's death remained elusive. Conversely, Mark's narrative painted him as a pawn in Lisa's scheme. He described how Lisa had gradually introduced the idea of poisoning John, making it seem like a desperate measure to free herself from an unbearable situation. He admitted to helping her obtain the poison, but insisted that he had never intended for John to die. His portrayal of Lisa as the mastermind added another layer of complexity to the case. To uncover the truth, the detectives decided to conduct a final round of intense interrogations. They hoped to catch one or both suspects in a lie or reveal inconsistencies that could break the case wide open. Miller and Carter knew that the key to solving the murder lay in understanding the true nature of the relationship between Lisa and Mark and the depth of their motives. In a tense interview, Lisa finally broke down. She admitted that she had felt trapped in her marriage and saw no way out other than eliminating John. However, she insisted that Mark had been an active participant, encouraging her to go through with the plan. Her confession provided crucial insight into her state of mind and her willingness to commit murder to achieve her goals. With this new information, the detectives turned their attention back to Mark. They confronted him with Lisa's confession, hoping to provoke a reaction. Mark, realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, began to unravel. He confessed to helping Lisa, but maintained that she had manipulated him from the start. The confessions from both suspects provided a clearer picture of the motives and events leading up to John's death. The detectives now had to piece together the final puzzle and determine how to proceed with arrests and charges, ensuring that justice would be served. The breakthrough in the case came when the detectives re-examined the timeline and physical evidence one last time. They discovered a crucial piece of evidence that had initially been overlooked: a security camera from a neighbor's house that captured a portion of the Andersons' backyard. The footage revealed Mark entering the Anderson home on the night of John's death, contradicting his alibi and providing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict for both Lisa and Mark. Lisa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Mark received a slightly lesser sentence due to his perceived secondary role in the crime. The community of Brooksville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, but there was a sense of closure as justice had been served. The quiet town of Greenfield was shaken to its core when the body of Jack Thompson was discovered in his modest home on the outskirts of town. Jack, a well-liked middle-aged man known for his generosity and calm demeanor, had recently gone through a tumultuous divorce from his wife, Layla. The divorce, finalized just months prior, had left Jack visibly strained, but no one could have anticipated the tragic end he would meet. Layla Thompson, once the high school sweetheart and longtime partner of Jack, had quickly moved on after their split. She found solace in Derek Stone, a charismatic yet troubled man with a shadowy past. Derek, a former convict with a history of violent offenses, had swept Layla off her feet, bringing a sense of danger and excitement into her life that she had never experienced before. The discovery of Jack's lifeless body under suspicious circumstances set off a whirlwind investigation that uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and revenge. The love triangle between Jack and Layla and Derek became the focal point of the investigation, revealing dark secrets and motives that lay hidden beneath the surface. Greenfield's local police force, led by Detective Sarah Lawson, was tasked with untangling the complex relationships and finding the truth behind Jack's untimely death. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this was not just a simple case of a crime of passion, but a meticulously planned act of vengeance. In the weeks that followed, the town would witness shocking revelations and unexpected twists as the true nature of the relationships between Jack, Layla, and Derek came to light. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, leaving everyone to wonder who could be trusted and who was hiding the darkest secrets. Jack and Layla Thompson's marriage had once been the epitome of stability and love. They had met in high school, their romance blossoming over the years into a marriage that seemed unbreakable. Jack, a kind-hearted man with a steady job as a schoolteacher, had always been the rock in their relationship. Layla, a nurse at the local hospital, complemented his steadiness with her nurturing and compassionate nature. However, as the years passed, the spark in their relationship began to fade. The stresses of daily life, combined with their inability to have children, placed a strain on their marriage. Layla's desire for excitement and change grew, leading her to seek solace outside their relationship. This quest for something new ultimately led her to Derek Stone. Derek Stone was a man with a troubled past. He had spent several years in prison for armed robbery and assault, but upon his release, he had vowed to turn his life around. His rugged good looks and charm quickly won Layla over, offering her the thrill and unpredictability she craved. Derek's presence in her life provided a stark contrast to the stability she had known with Jack. The affair between Layla and Derek was passionate and intense, leading to the eventual breakdown of her marriage to Jack. The divorce was bitter, with accusations and recriminations flying from both sides. Jack was devastated, unable to comprehend how the woman he had loved for so long could betray him in such a manner. Layla, on the other hand, felt liberated, ready to start a new chapter with Derek. Despite his attempts to move on, Jack found it difficult to let go of the past. He remained deeply in love with Layla, his heart aching at the thought of her with another man. His friends and colleagues noticed the change in him, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet sadness. Jack's attempts to rekindle his relationship with Layla were met with hostility, further deepening his despair. Derek, meanwhile, harbored his own grudges. He resented Jack for the hold he still seemed to have over Layla, and his violent tendencies began to resurface. Derek's jealousy and possessiveness became more pronounced, leading to frequent arguments with Layla. Despite this, Layla remained committed to Derek, convinced that their love was worth the turmoil. As the months passed, the tension between Jack, Layla, and Derek grew, setting the stage for the tragic events that were about to unfold. The love triangle fraught with jealousy and resentment would soon explode in a manner that would shock the entire town of Greenfield and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. The crisp autumn morning was shattered by the piercing scream of Mrs. Henderson, Jack's elderly neighbor, as she discovered his lifeless body sprawled across the living room floor. She had come over to check on Jack after noticing that his mail had piled up over the past few days. Her concern quickly turned to horror as she stumbled upon the gruesome scene. The local police were called immediately, And within minutes Detective Sarah Lawson and her team arrived at the scene. The sight that greeted them was both disturbing and puzzling. Jack's body lay in a pool of blood, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. There were signs of a violent struggle, with furniture overturned and broken glass scattered across the floor. As the forensic team began their meticulous work, Detective Lawson interviewed Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman, still visibly shaken, recounted her discovery and her interactions with Jack in the days leading up to his death. She mentioned hearing raised voices coming from Jack's house a few nights before, but she had assumed it was just another argument between him and Layla. Layla and Derek were quickly brought in for questioning. Layla appeared distraught, her eyes red from crying. Derek, on the other hand, was stoic, his expression unreadable. Detective Lawson noted the stark contrast between the two, her instincts telling her that there was more to their story than met the eye. Layla recounted her last interaction with Jack. She claimed that she had not seen him for several days, and that their last conversation had been about finalizing the sale of their former home. Derek corroborated Layla's account, stating that they had spent the night of Jack's death at his apartment, miles away from the crime scene. Despite their alibis, Detective Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She ordered a thorough search of Derek's apartment and began to dig deeper into his past. The initial results of the forensic analysis pointed towards a struggle. With Jack having put up a significant fight against his attacker, there were signs of blunt force trauma to his head, suggesting that he had been struck multiple times with a heavy object. The discovery of a bloodied baseball bat in Jack's garage further complicated the investigation. The bat had Jack's fingerprints on it, but there were also smudges that suggested someone else had handled it. Detective Lawson sent the bat to the lab for further analysis, hoping it would provide a crucial lead. The townspeople of Greenfield were abuzz with speculation. Theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a crime of passion. Jack's friends and colleagues were interviewed, painting a picture of a man who was deeply troubled, but not without enemies. Layla and Derek's tumultuous relationship became a focal point of the investigation, with many suspecting that their involvement went beyond just an affair. Detective Lawson knew that unraveling the truth behind Jack's death would require piecing together the fragmented lives of the people involved. The love triangle between Jack, Layla, and Derek was fraught with complexities, and she was determined to uncover every hidden detail, no matter how dark or disturbing. The investigation into Jack Thompson's murder began in earnest, with Detective Sarah Lawson leading the charge. Her first step was to establish a timeline of events leading up to Jack's death. She and her team interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, piecing together the last known movements of Jack, Layla, and Derek. The neighbors provided a wealth of information. Several had heard loud arguments coming from Jack's house in the days before his death. One neighbor, Mr. Parker, reported seeing a shadowy figure lurking around Jack's property late at night, although he couldn't provide a clear description. Another neighbor, Mrs. Green, mentioned seeing Layla leave Jack's house in a hurry the day before his body was found. Detective Lawson interviewed Layla's colleagues at the hospital, who described her as a dedicated nurse, but noted that she had become increasingly distracted and agitated in recent months. One colleague, Susan, recalled Layla confiding in her about the stress of her divorce and her volatile relationship with Derek. Susan mentioned that Layla had expressed fear for her safety on several occasions, hinting at Derek's violent tendencies. The investigation also delved into Derek's background. Detective Lawson discovered that Derek had a history of violence and had been in and out of prison for various offenses, including assault and armed robbery. She interviewed some of Derek's former associates, who painted a picture of a man prone to explosive outbursts and a deep-seated need for control. One former associate, Mike, mentioned that Derek had often talked about exacting revenge on anyone who wronged him. Despite Derek's troubling past, his alibi for the night of Jack's murder seemed solid. However, Detective Lawson couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that suggested he had a motive for wanting Jack out of the picture. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes, found during the search of his apartment, further fueled her suspicions. Layla's inconsistent statements also raised red flags. During her initial interview, she had claimed not to have seen Jack for days. However, Mrs. Green's account contradicted this, placing Layla at Jack's house the day before his death. When confronted with this discrepancy, Layla became defensive, insisting that she had only gone to collect some personal belongings and had left after a brief argument. As the investigation progressed, Detective Lawson uncovered a series of text messages between Layla and Derek that suggested they had discussed plans to confront Jack about his continued interference in their relationship. The messages hinted at a growing frustration with Jack and a desire to put an end to the constant conflict. Despite the mounting evidence, the case was far from straightforward. Knew that she needed more concrete proof to build a solid case against Derek and Layla. She ordered a thorough analysis of the crime scene, hoping to find forensic evidence that would link them directly to Jack's murder. The community of Greenfield watched anxiously as the investigation unfolded. The once quiet town was now the center of a media frenzy, with reporters flocking to cover the sensational story. The pressure on Detective Lawson and her team was immense, but she remained steadfast in her determination to uncover the truth and bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder deepened, suspicions surrounding Layla and Derek grew more pronounced. Detective Lawson and her team scrutinized every detail, piecing together the puzzle that seemed to implicate both Layla and Derek in Jack's death. Layla's behavior became increasingly erratic. Her initial grief gave way to a defensive and hostile attitude during subsequent interviews. When questioned about her presence at Jack's house, she provided conflicting accounts, further muddying the waters. Her colleagues at the hospital noted her frequent absences and whispered conversations on her phone, fueling speculation about her involvement in something sinister. Detective Lawson also focused on Derek's suspicious behavior. Despite his alibi, there were inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. Derek had claimed to be at his apartment on the night of the murder, but surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed his car on the road during the time frame in question. The footage, though grainy, provided enough evidence to warrant further investigation. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes was a significant breakthrough. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood matched Jack's, placing Derek at the crime scene. When confronted with this evidence, Derek's composure cracked. He denied any involvement, claiming that he had been framed, but his increasingly erratic behavior only deepened Detective Lawson's suspicions. Layla's phone records revealed a series of heated exchanges between her and Derek. In the days leading up to Jack's murder, the messages hinted at a plan to confront Jack and put an end to the constant turmoil he was causing in their lives. The tone of the messages grew more aggressive, with Derek urging Layla to take decisive action. One particular message stood out. Derek had texted Layla the night before the murder, saying, "It's time we take care of this once and for all." Layla's response was cryptic, but seemed to indicate her agreement. The messages provided a chilling glimpse into the escalating tension between the three individuals. Detective Lawson's team also uncovered financial records that revealed Layla had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Jack. The policy, worth a significant amount, named Layla as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the policy raised eyebrows, suggesting a possible financial motive for Jack's murder. As the evidence mounted, Detective Lawson knew she needed a confession to solidify the case. She decided to apply pressure on Layla, hoping to exploit the cracks in her story. During a tense interrogation, Layla finally broke down. She admitted to visiting Jack's house the day before his death, but insisted that she had left before anything happened. She claimed that Derek had become increasingly unhinged, pressuring her to cut all ties with Jack. Detective Lawson also interviewed Derek's former associates again, this time focusing on his violent tendencies and potential motive. Mike, the former associate who had mentioned Derek's penchant for revenge, revealed that Derek had often spoken about wanting to eliminate anyone who threatened his relationship with Layla. Despite the mounting evidence against Derek, the investigation faced a critical juncture. Detective Lawson needed concrete proof to link Derek directly to the crime. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle that would bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder continued, Detective Sarah Lawson delved deeper into Derek Stone's past. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear that Derek was a man with a history of violence and a potential for revenge. Derek's criminal record revealed a series of offenses dating back to his teenage years. He had been involved in gang activities, petty thefts, and assaults. His most serious conviction, however, was for armed robbery, which had landed him in prison for several years. During his incarceration, Derek had been involved in multiple altercations with other inmates, further highlighting his violent tendencies. Detective Lawson interviewed some of Derek's former associates, hoping to gain insight into his behavior and motives. Mike, the associate who had previously hinted at Derek's vengeful nature, provided a chilling account of Derek's time in prison. According to Mike, Derek had developed a reputation for being ruthless and unforgiving, often targeting those who crossed him or posed a threat. One former associate, Steve, recounted a particularly disturbing incident. Derek had been involved in a violent altercation with another inmate who had insulted him. The fight had left the inmate severely injured, and Derek had shown no remorse. Steve described Derek as a man who thrived on control and power, traits that had only intensified during his time behind bars. Detective Lawson also discovered that Derek had a history of unstable relationships. His ex-girlfriend, Lisa, came forward with her own harrowing account of their time together. Lisa described Derek as charming and attentive at first, but his demeanor quickly changed. He became possessive and abusive, isolating her from friends and family. She eventually managed to escape the relationship but remained fearful of Derek's potential for violence. Lisa's account provided further insight into Derek's character. She mentioned that Derek had often spoken about his desire for revenge against anyone who wronged him. He harbored deep-seated grudges and was willing to go to great lengths to settle scores. Detective Lawson realized that Derek's relationship with Layla and his resentment towards Jack fit this pattern perfectly. Armed with this new information, Detective Lawson intensified her efforts to find concrete evidence linking Derek to Jack's murder. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover any items that could connect him to the crime scene. The search yielded several pieces of potential evidence, including a set of keys that matched the locks on Jack's house and a blood-stained shirt hidden in the back of Derek's closet. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the shirt matched Jack's, providing a direct link between Derek and the crime. This discovery was a significant breakthrough, but Detective Lawson knew that it was not enough on its own to secure a conviction. She needed a confession or additional evidence to solidify the case. Detective Lawson decided to confront Derek with the new evidence, hoping to elicit a reaction. During the interrogation, Derek's composure began to crack. He vehemently denied any involvement, but his increasingly erratic behavior suggested otherwise. Layla, who had been brought in for questioning once again, appeared visibly shaken when confronted with the evidence against Derek. In a desperate bid to save herself, Layla began to distance herself from Derek. She claimed that he had manipulated her and that she had been too afraid to leave him. Layla's statements, while self-serving, provided further insight into the toxic and volatile nature of their relationship. Detective Lawson knew she was close to unraveling the truth, but she needed one final push to bring the case to its conclusion. As the investigation reached its critical juncture, new evidence and unexpected revelations added further complexity to the case. Detective Sarah Lawson and her team were determined to untangle the web of deceit that surrounded Jack Thompson's murder. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from an unexpected source. A former inmate who had shared a cell with Derek, named Tony, came forward with crucial information. Tony revealed that Derek had confided in him about his plan to get rid of Jack. According to Tony, Derek had expressed his frustration with Jack's continued presence in Layla's life and had boasted about his intention to eliminate the problem once and for all. Tony's account added weight to the theory that Derek had premeditated the murder. He provided specific details that matched the evidence found at the crime scene, including the use of the baseball bat as the murder weapon. Tony's testimony was a game-changer, providing the corroboration Detective Lawson needed to build a solid case against Derek. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Layla's secret was uncovered. Detective Lawson's team discovered a series of hidden bank accounts in Layla's name, containing large sums of money that she had been siphoning off over the past few years. This revelation raised questions about Layla's true motives and her potential involvement in the murder. Layla's financial records revealed that she had been planning to leave Derek and start a new life. She had been saving money in secret, waiting for the right moment to make her escape. This newfound information painted a different picture of Layla, suggesting that she might have had her own reasons for wanting Jack out of the way. Detective Lawson confronted Layla with the evidence of the hidden bank accounts. Layla broke down, admitting that she had been trapped in a toxic and abusive relationship with Derek. She confessed that she had feared for her life and had been planning to escape, but insisted that she had no involvement in Jack's murder. Layla claimed that Derek had acted alone, driven by his own jealous rage. As the investigation unfolded, another twist emerged. A third party, previously unknown to the investigators, was discovered to have had contact with both Layla and Derek. This individual named Ryan was a former colleague of Derek's from his criminal days. Ryan had recently been released from prison and had reconnected with Derek. Detective Lawson brought Ryan in for questioning, hoping to uncover his role in the case. Ryan admitted to meeting with Derek and Layla on several occasions, but denied any involvement in the murder. However, his statements were inconsistent, and his nervous demeanor suggested that he was hiding something. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Ryan's fingerprints were found on the baseball bat used to kill Jack. Under intense interrogation, Ryan finally cracked. He confessed that Derek had enlisted his help in carrying out the murder, promising him a share of the life insurance money that Layla had taken out on Jack. Ryan revealed that Derek had planned every detail, from the initial confrontation to the disposal of evidence. Ryan's confession provided the missing piece of the puzzle, implicating both Derek and himself in the murder. Layla's role remained murky, but the evidence suggested that she had been a pawn in Derek's twisted game. Detective Lawson knew that the case was far from straightforward, but she was determined to bring those responsible to justice. With Ryan's confession in hand, Detective Sarah Lawson prepared for the final confrontation. She knew that Derek Stone would not go down without a fight, and she braced herself for a tense and potentially dangerous encounter. Detective Lawson and her team planned a coordinated effort to arrest Derek. They decided to approach him at his apartment, where he had been staying with Layla. The element of surprise was crucial, as they anticipated that Derek might attempt to flee or react violently. On the day of the operation, the team moved swiftly and efficiently. Detective Lawson knocked on Derek's door, her heart pounding with anticipation. Derek answered, his expression a mix of surprise and defiance. Detective Lawson presented the evidence and Ryan's confession, informing Derek that he was under arrest for the murder of Jack Thompson. Derek's reaction was immediate and explosive. He lunged at Detective Lawson, shouting accusations and threats. The officers quickly subdued him, but not before Derek managed to land a few blows. His resistance only served to reinforce the image of a violent and unstable individual, further sealing his fate. As Derek was taken into custody, Layla was brought in for questioning once again. The revelation of Ryan's involvement had shaken her, and she seemed genuinely terrified of Derek. Layla insisted that she had been unaware of the full extent of Derek's plan, and that she had never intended for Jack to be harmed. Despite Layla's claims, the evidence suggested that she had at least some knowledge of Derek's intentions. Detective Lawson pressed her for details, hoping to unravel the final threads of the case. Under intense questioning, Layla admitted that she had suspected Derek was planning something, but had been too afraid to confront him. The climax of the investigation came when Derek, now facing the reality of his situation, decided to cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to provide a full confession and implicate Layla in the planning of the murder. Derek's confession was chilling, detailing the calculated and cold-blooded manner in which he had orchestrated Jack's death. Derek revealed that he had manipulated Layla into taking out the life insurance policy on Jack, promising her a future free from financial worries. He had then enlisted Ryan's help, using his former associate's desperation and loyalty to carry out the crime. Derek admitted that he had been driven by jealousy and a desire for control. Unable to tolerate Jack's continued presence in Layla's life, Layla, confronted with Derek's confession, broke down completely. She admitted to her role in the plan, though she maintained that she had never intended for Jack to be killed. Her fear of Derek and her desire for freedom had clouded her judgment, leading her down a dark and tragic path. With both Derek and Layla in custody, the case against them was solid. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, with Derek receiving a life sentence for his role as the mastermind behind the murder. Layla, though complicit, received a lesser sentence due to her cooperation and the evidence of her abusive relationship with Derek. The town of Greenfield, though forever changed by the events, found a renewed sense of unity and resilience. The legacy of Jack Thompson lived on, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of seeking justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves.